The snow came down in sheets so thick that downtown Chicago had all but erased itself from the world. By 7:40 on that Thursday morning in February, the towers along Michigan Avenue were nothing more than smeared gray suggestions behind curtains of relentless white, their steel and glass faces obscured, their bases buried in drifts that had swallowed the curbs and the fire hydrants and the decorative planters that the city had installed the previous spring in a burst of civic optimism. The wind moved through the canyon streets with a sound like something tearing. Taxis crawled through the intersections with their hazard lights blinking orange rhythms into the storm. A delivery man on a bicycle had given up and was walking the bike along the sidewalk, his head down, his entire body a posture of patient endurance. Daniel Hayes stood at the corner of Wacker and Adams and watched the signal cycle through its colors, green, yellow, red, green again, without crossing, because Lily had stopped beside him to watch a sparrow attempting to eat something frozen from the sidewalk, and he had learned a long time ago that when Lily stopped to observe something, the most useful thing he could do was wait. He was 38 years old. He wore a Carhartt jacket, the color of dried tobacco. Its insulated lining patched twice, once at the left elbow where a nail had caught it 3 winters ago, once at the right shoulder where the original seam had finally surrendered, and its front zipper replaced last January with one from the hardware store that didn't quite match the original, but worked fine, and that was what mattered. His work boots were steel-toed Wolverines, salt-stained to a pale gray along the sides and cracked along the left toe box from too many seasons of freeze and thaw and freeze again. A canvas equipment bag, heavy with a thermos and some rolled blueprints and a tablet computer and other things that were his business, hung from his right shoulder. His left hand held the hand of his daughter. Lily was 6 years old, and she wore a puffy pink coat that was perhaps one size too small, not because it was the only coat available to her, but because she had refused to stop wearing it since October, when she'd found it at the back of the closet and rediscovered her devotion to it. On her head was a knit hat in the shape of a penguin. Its body was the hat. Its wings came down over her ears as flaps, and its button eyes were slightly asymmetrical because one had been reattached after she'd lost it in a playground, and its orange felt beak was a little flattened from being slept on. She had been given better hats. She wore this one. She was currently examining the sparrow with the concentration of a scientist observing a phenomenon of considerable interest. The sparrow had found something, a fragment of pretzel, maybe, or a chip, and was working at it with the determined efficiency of a creature that operates in a permanent state of urgent need. The signal changed again. The sparrow startled and was gone. "Almost there, Bug," Daniel said. She looked up at him. Her eyes were gray-blue, the same color as his, and at the moment they held the particular brightness of a child who has been outside in cold air and is not especially bothered by it. "Is it a tall building?" "Very tall." "How tall?" 40 floors. She considered this the way she considered most facts with deliberate seriousness, as though she was checking it against some internal reference system. "That's 10 times as tall as our building. Our building has 4 floors. 10 times 4 is 40. She was not showing off. She was just making sure the arithmetic was right before committing to it. She had been doing arithmetic in her head since she was 4, which Daniel found quietly astonishing every time, and tried not to let on because he didn't want her to feel watched. "You're right," he said. "Okay." She took his hand again with the easy confidence of someone returning to a task. They sat down briefly. They crossed. The Harrow Building occupied the full block between Wacker and Adams, a 40-story tower of structural steel and Vermont granite that had been completed in 1987 and renovated in 3 significant phases since, most recently 2 years ago, when the lobby had been entirely gutted and rebuilt. The old terrazzo floors torn up, the old brass fixtures stripped out, and everything replaced with an atrium of white Carrara marble and brushed bronze that rose 4 stories through the building's base and made arriving visitors feel, in the first moment of entry, as though they had stepped inside something that considered itself important. The revolving doors were flanked by ornamental topiaries shaped into pyramids, draped now in an inch of snow, and by two security guards in dark coats who had the look of people who had been standing in cold lobbies for so long they had forgotten there was any other kind of standing. Daniel pushed through the revolving door with his shoulder and guided Lily through the adjacent accessible panel beside it, and the roar of the storm cut off behind them the way a door cuts off a room's noise immediately, completely, with a sudden silence that felt almost physical. The lobby was warm and smelled of coffee from the kiosk in the far corner, and something faintly floral from the arrangement of white lilies on the reception credenza near the elevator bank. The marble floor shone under recessed lighting. A bronze sculpture at the center of the atrium, an abstracted figure with its arms raised toward the ceiling in a gesture that might have been celebration or supplication, the artist, having declined to specify, caught the overhead light and distributed it in long gold lines across the floor that shifted slightly as people moved through them. Lily looked up at the ceiling. Her mouth opened slightly. "Daddy," she said, very quietly. "I know," he said. He was navigating across the lobby toward the elevator bank, specifically the North Bank, the executive bank, the one that served the upper half of the building when the collision happened. The woman came through the revolving door at speed, the kind of speed that communicates importance, that says the weather is an inconvenience to be moved through rather than a condition to be acknowledged. She was followed closely by a young man who was managing, with varying success, a leather laptop bag, a leather portfolio that kept sliding from under his arm, and an iced coffee in a clear plastic cup that he had been carrying for approximately 2 blocks and that had been threatening for most of that distance to escape his grip entirely. The woman herself carried nothing. She wore a charcoal wool coat that fit her with the precision of something made specifically for her body, over what was visible of a structured ivory blazer. Her hair was the particular shade of dark blonde that comes from excellent highlights maintained on a regular schedule. Her heels clicked against the marble with a sound like a metronome set to allegro, and she was on her phone. Her voice, low and clipped, her eyes fixed at the middle distance of someone engaged in a conversation that is more important than where they are walking. She walked directly into Daniel's left shoulder. The impact was enough to turn her half a step to the left. Her hand came up reflexively, catching nothing, and the iced coffee, which had been looking for its moment since it left the coffee cart 2 blocks back, took that moment. It came down in a long, unhurried diagonal arc and landed squarely on the front of Daniel's jacket. The brown spreading outward through the heavy canvas in a stain that was immediate, total, and clearly not going to come out in any hurry. The cold hit him first, then the smell, then the sound of Lily's sharp intake of breath. He stopped. He looked down at the scene. He looked up. Olivia Grant, CEO and founder of Grant Capital Partners. 41 years old. The anchor tenant on the 43rd floor. And, as of 11 months ago, the lead party in negotiations to acquire the very building she was standing in was already looking at him. Not with apology. Not with the startled, reflexive guilt that most people produce in the first second after an accident. With something that arrived faster than guilt. Her eyes moved across him, the way eyes move across a room being appraised for value. The stained jacket, the equipment bag, the salt-damaged boots, the small child in the penguin hat pressing herself against his leg. The assessment took 2 seconds, perhaps less. It was comprehensive. "You should watch where you're going," she said. Daniel blinked once. The deliberateness of the blink was the only sign that he had heard what she'd actually said, rather than what he might have expected her to say. "I was watching where I was going," he said. "My coat." She looked at her own sleeve, where a single brown droplet had landed near the cuff. She brushed it away with 2 fingers, quickly. The way you'd brush away something that had no right to be there. "I'm sorry about your coat," Daniel said. His voice was even. "My jacket seems to have absorbed most of it." She looked at the jacket again, at the stain, at the patch on the elbow, at the replacement zipper. Something passed through her expression. It was not guilt, and it was not quite contempt in its fully formed state. It was closer to the preliminary stage of contempt, the moment when a judgment about a person solidifies from impression into conviction. "Ryan," she said to her assistant, without looking at him, "get the car to come around to Adams. I'll need 10 minutes. Then she walked around Daniel as though he were a structural feature of the lobby, a post, a column, something fixed and without reaction, and continued toward the elevator bank. She stopped at the security desk. Daniel, his hand back in Lily's, continued toward the north elevator bank. "Excuse me." He turned. Olivia Grant was standing 6 feet away with her weight on one foot and her arms loosely crossed in the posture of someone who is prepared to be patient for approximately as long as they decide to be. Her assistant, Ryan, 26, Yale, 18 months into this position, already expert in the art of becoming invisible when necessary, had stopped slightly behind and to her left, his eyes cast downward at the laptop bag strap he appeared to be examining for wear. "This isn't really a public building," she said. Her tone was that of someone explaining something that should not require explanation to someone who should already know it. "The lobby is accessible to tenants and their guests during business hours. Are you here for a specific purpose?" "I have a meeting," Daniel said. "A meeting." She repeated the phrase with a precision that communicated doubt, not the loud, assertive doubt of direct challenge, more assured doubt of someone who has already decided what the truth is and is merely confirming it. "On which floor?" "The 40th, a fractional elevation of one eyebrow." It was the most economical expression of skepticism he had ever seen. "The 40th floor is executive conference space. It's not generally accessible without prior coordination with building management." "I'm aware. What company are you meeting with?" Daniel set the equipment bag down on the marble floor with a deliberateness that was not aggressive but was not passive either. He straightened his stained jacket, or rather, he arranged it, the way a person arranges a thing that belongs to them, regardless of what anyone else thinks about it, and looked at her steadily. "That's between me and the 40th floor," he said. At the security desk, Marcus, the morning shift guard who had been doing this job for 2 years and had developed the observational acuity that comes from spending 8 hours a day watching people navigate lobbies, was paying careful and entirely unapparent attention to this exchange. He recognized Daniel Hayes. He had seen the name on the access list 3 times in the past 2 months during preparation for the closing. He had been briefly, by Gerald Fordham the previous afternoon. He knew exactly what was about to happen if Olivia Grant continued down this particular road, and he was experiencing the specific helplessness of a person who can see an outcome clearly but is not positioned to prevent it. Olivia turned toward him. "Marcus, has this gentleman checked in?" Marcus composed himself. "Good morning, Miss Grant. I was just about to—" "Has he checked in?" "Not yet, ma'am. They arrived just before you came through the door." She turned back to Daniel with the look of someone who has been proved right by facts. "Perhaps you could come to the desk and provide identification before proceeding further into the building." "I know how the process works," Daniel said. "We've been in the lobby for about 45 seconds. People who have business here generally know to check in at the desk on arrival." The sentence was smooth and even, shaped like a statement of policy but carrying the payload of something else entirely. It's simply how it works. Lily was not looking at the sculpture anymore. She was looking at Olivia Grant with the open, undefended attention that children bring to things they are genuinely trying to understand, the way they look at a math problem that doesn't resolve, at a word whose meaning they haven't been taught. She was not frightened. She was attempting to figure out what she was seeing. "Is this your daughter?" Olivia asked, her gaze moving to Lily with what might have looked, from a distance, like concern. "Yes," Daniel said. The single syllable was flat and even and contained, for anyone listening carefully, a clear demarcation of territory. "You've brought her to a business meeting. Her school has a teacher development day." "I see." Olivia's eyes moved across Lily with the same appraising efficiency she had applied to Daniel. The coat that was too small, the penguin hat, the small boots with Velcro straps that had a cartoon narwhal on the side. You know, the city actually has a number of programs specifically for working parents in situations like this: supervised group care, day programs at the community centers, for people who find themselves without other arrangements. She said it in the tone of someone performing a kindness. That was the thing about it, it was precisely calibrated to sound helpful. It was not helpful. "Thank you," Daniel said. His voice had not changed in volume or cadence, but something had shifted in it, some quality of temperature. "We'll head upstairs now. I only mention it because it's not really appropriate to bring a child into a professional environment." She made a gesture, brief and dismissive, that swept Daniel, his jacket, his bag, and whatever category of person she had assigned him to into a single, economical motion. "Understood," Daniel said. "Thank you for your concern." He picked up the equipment bag. They walked toward the north bank. He was perhaps 30 feet from the elevator doors when her voice came across the lobby again, carrying the easy confidence of someone accustomed to rooms that belong to them. "You know what does concern me, though?" He kept walking for 2 more steps. Then he stopped. He did not turn around immediately. He stopped, and there was a moment, brief, contained in which something internal completed itself. Then he turned. "That coat," Olivia said. She was still standing where she had been, and her voice had taken on the measured, considered cadence of someone giving careful voice to a genuine concern. Someone who has thought about this, someone who only wants what is right, is at least a size too small. "Those boots, they're not waterproof, are they?" And she was outside in a blizzard. A pause, precisely long enough. "I just think that if a person finds themselves in a situation where they can't adequately, where they're not in a position to provide—" She stopped, tilted her head slightly. "Some people should perhaps think carefully before taking on that kind of responsibility." The lobby was not large, but it was not small, and it was not empty. There were people at the coffee kiosk, a woman waiting for the south elevators, a man in a long coat reading something on his phone near the door, and all of them had gone still in the particular way. People go still when they understand that something is happening, that they should not be watching but cannot stop watching. Marcus, at the security desk, was looking at his keyboard with the fixed, unseeing focus of a man who has decided his keyboard is the most important thing in the room. "Stop." The word was not loud. There was no raised voice, no sudden heat, no performance of anger. It was simply a word spoken with absolute authority, and it cut through the atrium the way a fault line cuts through stone invisibly present, and then, under the right conditions, suddenly and entirely visible. Daniel turned around for the second time. What had changed in his face was not what most people would have expected. It was not rage. It was not the red-faced, jaw-tight, visibly struggling expression of a person working to contain something that wants to come out. It was the opposite of that. A face that had stopped performing patience and was now simply, completely itself. Clear, certain. He walked back toward her. Not quickly, not aggressively. With the steady, deliberate pace of a man crossing a job site, covering ground, because there is ground to cover. And not for any other reason. He stopped 6 feet away. "You don't know anything about my daughter," he said. His voice was quiet and entirely without theatrical emphasis. "You have been in the same room as her for less than 4 minutes. You don't know that coat is last season's, and she fits it fine through the arms and shoulders, and she refused the new one I bought in November because she loves that one. You don't know she has 2 pairs of waterproof boots at home and chose these today because they have a narwhal on the side, and she just read a book about narwhals. You don't know how she's cared for. You don't know what she eats for breakfast, or who reads to her at night, or who sits with her when she has a nightmare, or what kind of father I am." He held her gaze. "You looked at me for 30 seconds and made a decision about all of it. And then you said it out loud, about a 6-year-old child, in a public lobby. I want to be clear with you. That's not concern. That's not appropriate. What that is an assumption about who is allowed to be a parent based on what someone's wearing when they walk into a building. A pause. Not for effect. Because he was finished, and the silence was part of what he was saying. You're wrong, he said simply. About all of it. Olivia Grant had, in the course of 14 years of operating at the highest levels of commercial finance, been in a great many confrontations. She had been challenged across negotiating tables by men with significantly more resources than Daniel Hayes. She had been dismissed, condescended to, spoken over, and underestimated by people with considerably more institutional authority. She had faced all of it and had never, in her recollection, found herself standing in a lobby, uncertain what to do next. She was uncertain now. I only meant, she began. Daddy. Lily's voice came from beside him, soft and untroubled. The voice of a child who has not fully understood everything that was said, but understands enough to know that what would be useful now is movement. We're going to be late for your meeting. He looked down at her. The certainty in his expression did not soften. Exactly, certainty does not soften, it remains itself, but it became something else, something additional, something that coexisted with the certainty. The specific, completely unguarded tenderness of a person whose love has no audience and therefore no performance. You're right, he said. Let's go. He took her hand. They walked to the elevator. He did not look at Olivia Grant again. She stood where she was and watched them reach the elevator bank and watched the guard Sandra, the North Bank guard, step forward and watched something happen at the panel that she couldn't fully see from where she was standing, and watched the elevator doors open and watched them step in. She stood there for a moment after the doors had closed. Then she became aware that several people in the lobby were looking at her, and she straightened her coat and walked toward the desk. She was not, in any conventional sense, bothered. She told herself this. The North Bank elevator required either a key card registered to a tenant of floors 21 through 40 or a verification code entered by the security desk after confirming the visitor against the day's access list. It was not a complicated system. It was a standard feature of commercial buildings of this class. Olivia Grant had been using it for 3 years. Sandra Reeves had been the North Bank security officer for 11 years, and she could read a situation from 50 feet with the unerring accuracy of long experience. She had been at her post for the past 20 minutes. She had seen Daniel Hayes and his daughter cross the lobby. She had seen what had happened near the door. She had watched the exchange near the security desk. She had not intervened because her role did not require her to intervene and because, more practically, she knew things about the situation that made intervention unnecessary. When Daniel and Lily reached the North Bank, she stepped forward. Good morning. If I could verify your access. Daniel Hayes, he said. 8 o'clock. She looked at her tablet. She was a composed person by nature and by training. But something in the way she looked at the tablet, the brief, fractional pause indicated that the name on the screen was exactly what she had expected, and that what it said beside the name was exactly what she also expected, and that the morning had, in fact, been going exactly the way mornings sometimes go when particular pieces of information have not been fully distributed to all interested parties. Of course, Mr. Hayes. She stepped back to the panel. She entered a code. The elevator doors opened immediately. No wait, no delay. The kind of response that indicates the elevator had already been assigned and was already waiting. The Wacker room on 40 is set up for you. Gerald Fordham arrived about 20 minutes ago. Your counsel is already there as well. Good. Thank you. She hesitated 1 fraction of a second. Mr. Hayes, I apologize that I wasn't at the desk earlier. When you came through the door, there was a brief acknowledgement in his expression that registered the meaning of what she'd said without requiring elaboration. Not your job to be everywhere, he said. You're fine. He knew her name. She was not wearing a name tag. He had known her name because he had made it his business. Over 7 years of owning this building, to know the names of the people who kept it running. He had never actually met her in person before today. He had learned her name from a staff report Gerald Fordham sent quarterly, and he had read those reports carefully because they were about people who were his responsibility. Lily went first into the elevator, with the unbothered confidence of a child who has been in many elevators. Daniel followed. He pressed the button for 40, which was already illuminated, and stood facing the doors as they began to close. A hand came through the gap. The sensors caught it, and the doors reversed. Olivia Grant stepped in. Ryan, a few steps behind, made it in just before the doors resumed their closing. The four of them stood in the elevator. A CEO and her assistant, a single father in a stained jacket, and a 6-year-old girl with a penguin on her head who had opened the animal facts book she kept in her coat pocket and was already reading about Arctic foxes. The silence in the elevator was not empty. It was full of everything that had happened in the lobby, compressed into the small space of a rising box, unable to go anywhere. Olivia looked at the panel. The button for the 40th floor was illuminated. She pressed 40 anyway. It was an involuntary thing, the hand movement of someone completing a familiar action without thinking through whether it was necessary. Nothing changed. The floor had already been selected. Same floor? She said. She intended it to come out neutral. It did not come out entirely neutral. Appears so, Daniel said, without looking at her. Ryan had found a spot on the elevator wall panel, a small manufacturer's logo, slightly scratched, that appeared to require his complete and unwavering attention. The elevator hummed. The number above the door climbed. Lily turned a page. Arctic foxes change color in winter, she said. To no one in particular, but apparently to the room, because she felt the information was worth sharing. Their fur goes white, so they're harder to see in the snow. It's called camouflage. Daniel glanced at her. Like the blizzard outside, she added, in case the connection was not obvious. The number above the door climbed. 12, 13, 14. You really do have a meeting on 40, Olivia said. It was the most unguarded thing she had said all morning. It came out, with the texture of a person thinking out loud rather than performing a position. I do, Daniel said. With whom? He looked at her then. Just briefly, just long enough to convey without cruelty and without satisfaction that the answer was available and would present itself shortly. You'll find out, he said. The number above the door settled on 40. The elevator slowed. The doors opened. The 40th floor of the Harrow building was not a floor that people worked on in the conventional sense. There were no workstations, no communal kitchens with hand-printed notes above the coffee machine about whose mug was whose. The 40th floor existed for meetings of consequence, the kind that require a certain quality of room, a certain quality of silence, a certain distance from the daily friction of regular floors. The carpeting was deep charcoal. The walls were pale oak. The overhead lighting was tuned warm. The Wacker room was the largest of the conference rooms, occupying the northeast corner, its glass wall offering in better weather an uninterrupted view across the river to the lakeshore. On this morning, the windows showed only white. The storm had erased everything beyond the glass into a uniform blankness that was almost meditative in its completeness. Through the glass wall of the room, visible from the elevator lobby, the table was arranged for a meeting of 8, water glasses at each place. A carafe of coffee at the center, steam still rising, folders, documents, pens, the particular organized readiness of a room that has been prepared by people who know what they are doing and have done it correctly. 8 people occupied chairs around the table. 4 were attorneys, Patricia Whitmore and her partner, James Kellerman, and 2 associates from the firm of Whitmore, Kellerman, and Drake, who specialized in commercial real estate transactions and were widely regarded as the most thorough and humorless firm in their category, which was exactly what you wanted in an attorney when you were doing what Daniel Hayes was doing today. 2 were representatives from the title company handling the deed transfer documentation, each with their own set of folders. One was Gerald Fordham, the building's property manager, 9 years in the role, whose expression, as he looked up from his papers and saw Daniel Hayes walking out of the elevator, combined professional composure with the quiet relief of a person whose complicated morning was about to enter a simpler phase. And one was Thomas Reyes, Daniel's financial advisor, who had known Daniel for 12 years and who stood up when the elevator opened and gave a wave that was specifically directed at the person standing 6 inches to Daniel's left. Lily waved back. She liked Thomas Reyes. He had once spent an entire rainy Saturday afternoon helping her build a Lego lighthouse with a working LED in the beacon. Olivia Grant stood in the elevator lobby. She had been in dozens of rooms like this, on dozens of floors like this, in dozens of buildings like this. In the course of 14 years of doing what she did, she had been the most powerful person in most of those rooms. She was accustomed to the particular confidence that comes from knowing, when you step off an elevator, that the room you are about to enter is organized around your arrival. The room beyond the glass was not organized around her arrival. The 8 people in it were looking at the elevator lobby, and 4 of them had their eyes on Daniel Hayes, and 2 of them, Thomas Reyes and Gerald Fordham, had the expressions of people who know the person who just walked off the elevator and are glad to see them. The receptionist, Claire, composed and thoroughly briefed, rose from behind the curved desk. "Mr. Hayes, good morning." "Welcome." She looked at Lily. "And Miss Hayes, we have the lounge ready for you, colored pencils, the activity cards, and I believe Thomas left a book about marine animals in there last time." Lily looked at her father. "It's okay, Bug. You see Thomas in there?" Daniel nodded toward the glass. Lily looked. Thomas Reyes gave a second, more emphatic wave. "Will you be done soon?" Lily asked. "About an hour. Maybe a little more." She weighed this against the marine animals book and the colored pencils. "Okay," she decided, and went with Claire, her animal facts book already tucked back into her pocket, toward the small lounge at the end of the hall. Daniel watched until she turned the corner. Then he turned to look at the Wacker room. And then, because she was standing directly between him and the door, at Olivia Grant. She was still holding her portfolio. She was standing with a stillness that was not the same as the composed, authoritative stillness with which she had crossed the lobby 15 minutes ago. This was a different kind of stillness. The stillness of a person in whom several things are happening simultaneously, and none of them have finished yet. "After you," Daniel said, and gestured toward the room. Patricia Whitmore was 61 years old and had been practicing commercial real estate law for 27 years, and she had a gift that she considered more valuable than any legal expertise she possessed, which was the ability to understand the precise emotional temperature of a room she had never been in before, within approximately 15 seconds of entering it. She had walked into the Wacker room at 7:20 that morning, reviewed the documents, accepted a cup of coffee, and spent the intervening 80 minutes doing what she always did before a significant closing, thinking about what could go wrong. She had not anticipated this. She watched Olivia Grant walk through the conference room door and take the measure of the room, the attorneys, the title representatives, the property manager, Thomas Reyes, with the practiced, rapid assessment of an executive who is constantly reading rooms. And she watched the assessment arrive at its result and produce, in Olivia's expression, something she had not seen in that expression yet, a quality of stillness that was not composure, but was instead what lies on the other side of composure when it has been exceeded. Gerald Fordham rose first. He was a methodical man, not given to displays, but the morning had been a strange one, and he had been in this building for 9 years, and he had a certain loyalty to what the building represented and to who it had belonged to. "Mr. Hayes," he said, extending his hand. "It's a genuine pleasure to meet you in person. 9 years I've been managing this property. I should have made the trip to your office long before now. The reports you've sent have been excellent," Daniel said, shaking his hand. "The building's in good condition because of how your team runs it." "I mean that." Thomas Reyes had come around the table. He and Daniel shook hands with the ease of people who have been through complicated things together and are glad to be on the same side of them. 3 minutes late, Thomas said. I was starting to wonder about the weather. Weather was fine. Lobby was complicated. He said it without emphasis, without looking at Olivia. Patricia Whitmore absorbed this. She processed the stained jacket and the equipment bag, and she processed the way Olivia Grant had come through the door and gone to the far end of the table rather than to the seat that had been nominally designated for her in the pre-meeting arrangement. And she understood, with the efficiency of long experience, the broad outline of what had happened in the 40 minutes between the collision at the door and this moment. She did not change her expression. She extended her hand toward Olivia with professional evenness. Miss Grant. Patricia Whitmore, lead counsel for Mr. Hayes in this transaction. We're glad you made it through the storm. Your team proposed some revisions to Section 7.4 last week. We have responses prepared, and I think we should be able to get to agreement on most of the outstanding items this morning. Olivia shook her hand. The handshake was automatic, a reflex from years of training. Miss Whitmore. Yes, the 7. 4 amendments were, she stopped. Something was not completing itself in her mental architecture. She looked from Patricia to Daniel, who was pulling out his chair not at the head of the table, but at the side, near the window, with the unaffected manner of a person arranging himself in a space that belongs to him and that he has no need to perform authority within. I'm sorry. I want to be certain I understand in what capacity is Mr. Hayes here today? There was a pause of perhaps 2 seconds. Mr. Hayes owns the building, Patricia Whitmore said. She said it the way she said most things. Clearly, without decoration, in the tone of someone for whom facts are sufficient and do not require enhancement. He is the sole member of Harrow Building LLC, which has held title to this property for the past 7 years, having received it from his father's estate following the elder Mr. Hayes's passing. You've been in negotiations with his representatives for the past 14 months to acquire the property. This is the closing meeting at which we execute the transfer documentation. A beat. You are here as the buyer. Mr. Hayes is here as the seller. The room was quiet. Olivia Grant looked at Daniel Hayes. At the Carhartt jacket with the coffee stain that had been caused by her iced coffee, at the equipment bag on the credenza, at the work boots crossed at the ankle as he settled into his chair, at the man who she had told 40 minutes ago in the lobby of his own building that people like him shouldn't be in places like this. Let's get started, Daniel said, and opened the folder in front of him. There is a kind of silence that falls when a room of people all understand simultaneously that something has occurred that cannot be undone, and that the undoing is not available as an option, and that therefore what happens next must begin from a different place than where everyone in the room had believed they were standing. It is not the silence of shock, which is louder and more disordered. It is the silence of a completed equation, of a door that has finished closing. That silence lasted perhaps 5 seconds in the Wacker room. Then the attorneys opened their folders and the title representatives arranged their documents, and Gerald Fordham straightened in his chair, and Thomas Reyes poured himself a second cup of coffee, and the business of the closing began to time. Fill the room with the purposeful, impersonal noise of consequence being managed. Olivia Grant had taken the seat across from Daniel. She had set her portfolio on the table and placed her pen beside it, and arranged herself with the care of someone executing precise motor control, because other things are currently occupying significant cognitive resources. She was, by any reasonable measure, a person of exceptional composure. She had built something real and substantial over 14 years of work that had required, at various points, facing down people with significantly more power and resources and institutional backing. She did not collapse under pressure. She was not given to visible distress. She was also a person who had, approximately 40 minutes ago, told a man in a lobby that his child might be better off if he hadn't had her, and that man was now sitting across from her at a table holding a signed letter of intent for a transaction that she had spent 14 months and considerable institutional capital pursuing. Patricia Whitmore was walking through the document review with the calm, methodical pace of someone who has done this many times and intends to do it correctly, page by page, section by section. The language of transfer and warranty and representation moving through the room in measured legal cadences. Olivia's team, Ryan, managing documents on the laptop. 2 attorneys from her firm, reviewing in real time, engaged with professional thoroughness. There were questions about Section 7(4), which concerned post-closing operational continuity requirements. There were the proposed amendments, which Patricia walked through one by one, accepting 2 with minor modifications and declining the 3rd with a clear and documented explanation that satisfied no one fully but was understood by everyone to be the position from which they would be working. Through all of it, Daniel was quiet more than he was vocal, asking precise questions when he had them and deferring to Patricia when the terrain was purely legal. He had a glass of water that he kept next to his folder. He had a pen that he had not yet used. He had the patience of a person who knows that meetings are not the place where things actually happen. They are the place where things that have already happened get recorded. At 9:47, he set his pen down. "Before we continue," he said, "I'd like to say something." The movement of papers slowed. The room's attention, which had been distributed across documents and laptops and coffee cups, collected itself. He looked at Olivia Grant across the table. The look was not hostile. It was direct in the way that some people's directness is a form of respect, an acknowledgement that the other person is someone whose time and attention are not to be wasted. "My father was a plumber," he said. "He worked commercial and residential for 30 years. He also invested carefully, over those same 30 years, in small commercial properties. Nothing large, nothing flashy, one at a time, bought when he could afford them and managed personally because he didn't trust other people to care about them the way he did. When he died, he left me this building. It was the largest thing he owned. He had worked for it for most of his adult life." He paused, not for dramatic effect but because he was choosing what came next. "I still work construction, 2 days a week when my schedule allows. I do it partly because I find it useful to remember what a building actually is. Not a number on a spreadsheet, not a line item in a capital deployment plan, but a physical thing that someone built with their hands and that other people go inside and do their work in, and sometimes spend a large portion of their waking lives in. I wore this jacket today because I was at a job site yesterday and didn't have time to change before coming downtown. I'm not mentioning any of this to establish some kind of credibility with you. I don't need to." His voice was quiet and entirely level. "I'm mentioning it because I want to be precise about what I'm about to say, and I want the context to be accurate. What happened in the lobby this morning happened to a man in a work jacket. The decision I'm making at this table affects 412 tenants, a 9-person building management team, and the legacy of a plumber from Bridgeport who worked 30 years to make it possible. Those things are connected. I think it's worth saying that out loud." He held the room's attention without effort, which is the only way a room's attention is worth holding. He was not performing. He was simply saying things that were true, in the order in which they needed to be said. "You told me this morning that I didn't belong in this building," he said. "You suggested that my daughter was insufficiently cared for. You said, and I want to be precise, because this is the part that matters most, that some people should think carefully before having children if they can't provide for them. You said that, in a public lobby, to a man you had known for 90 seconds, in front of his 6-year-old daughter, based on the make and condition of his jacket." He looked at her steadily. "That statement is wrong. I could demonstrate to you in about 4 minutes that it's materially wrong. I have an office, I have resources, my daughter wants for nothing material and a great deal that isn't. But that's not the point, and demonstrating it would miss the point entirely, because the wrongness of what you said doesn't depend on my circumstances. It depends on the fact that you said it to a person you had not given 30 seconds of actual attention to, and that you said it with complete confidence, and that you used a child to say it." A water glass was set down very carefully somewhere to his right. "I've been a landlord for 7 years," he continued. This building has tenants who are accountants and tenants who are tailors and tenants who run a repair shop on the ground floor that's been there since before my father bought the building. Some of them are in this lobby every day in work clothes very similar to mine. Some of them bring their kids to the office when school doesn't open. What I'm deciding, right now, is whether to hand custody of this building to someone who looked at one of those people, who happened to be me, and concluded in 30 seconds that he was the wrong sort of person for the space he was occupying. He let that settle. Patricia Whitmore, who had spent 27 years in rooms where power was exercised and contested, and occasionally misread, was looking at the table in front of her with a quality of attention that was extremely careful and entirely internal. Gerald Fordham's expression had the quality of a man watching something he will carry with him for a long time. Ryan was looking at his laptop with absolute concentration. The laptop was closed. "This transaction is not in question," Daniel said. "The terms are fair, the documentation is sound, and Patricia will tell you the legal framework is as tight as anything she's worked on in the past 5 years. That is not the issue." He folded his hands on the table. "The issue is what kind of stewardship I'm handing this building to. My father took 30 years to build what made this possible. I have a responsibility to what he built, and to the 412 people who work and operate inside it, to make this decision carefully. The financial terms are one part of that decision. They are not the whole of it." He stopped. He had said what he needed to say. The room held its silence. Outside the windows, the storm continued. The city was still invisible beyond the glass, erased to white, patient, waiting for the weather to pass the way cities wait for all things to pass, which is simply by continuing to be there until they do. Olivia Grant had not built what she had built by refusing to look at things clearly. The skill that had carried her further and faster than most of her contemporaries, more than intelligence, more than financial instinct, more even than the capacity for work that had consumed her 20s in ways she could only now assess with any perspective, was a specific, sometimes uncomfortable form of honesty. Not honesty with other people as a primary value. Honesty with herself about what was actually happening, as opposed to what she wanted to be happening or what had been happening 5 minutes ago before circumstances shifted. The circumstances had shifted considerably in the past 40 minutes. She was sitting across from the owner of a property her firm had spent 14 months pursuing, had committed 3 advisory teams and 2 law firms to, had structured a significant portion of its next 12 months of capital deployment around, and had identified as the anchor of a commercial portfolio expansion that she had presented to her investors with a confidence she had believed was fully warranted. She was sitting across from him, and he had just said with the unhurried certainty of someone who has earned the right to be unhurried, and certain that the decision of whether to complete this transaction was, at this moment, not entirely about the financial terms. She thought about the lobby. She went over it with the thorough, unsentimental attention she applied to postmortems on failed transactions, on strategies that hadn't played out the way she'd modeled them, on errors of judgment that had cost her in quantifiable ways. She went over the moment by the door, the coffee, the assessment, the things she had said near the security desk, the things she had said before they got to the elevator. She thought about the last thing she had said, about the child. She thought about her own daughter, Clara, 11, currently at school in Evanston. Currently, as best Olivia knew, perfectly fine in a coat that fit her correctly because Olivia replaced it every fall. She thought about what it would feel like to stand in a lobby somewhere with Clara beside her and have a stranger look at both of them for 30 seconds and conclude, out loud, in front of other people, that she was perhaps not suited to be someone's parent. It would feel, she thought, like a very particular kind of violation. Not the kind that makes noise, the kind that lands quietly and sits. She put her pen on the table. "You're right," she said. Patricia Whitmore did not move. Gerald Fordham did not move. The room received the 2 words with a stillness that was different from the previous silences, less loaded, more expectant. "I made assumptions this morning that I had no basis to make, and I made them quickly and with considerable confidence. That's the part I find most difficult to look at clearly. She kept her voice level. It was one of the more demanding things she had done recently. Keeping her voice level while saying this. The confidence. The speed. I wasn't uncertain about any of it, and I had no actual information. That's not a small error. That's a systematic one. She paused. What I said about your daughter has no defense. There is no reading of it that makes it appropriate. It wasn't concern. It was an expression of contempt that I dressed up as concern, and I knew that when I was saying it, and I said it anyway, because I was confident I was right about what I was looking at. She stopped, and for a moment her composure did something that composure rarely does. It simply allowed what was underneath it to be briefly visible. I was wrong. And I'm not going to tell you it was a misunderstanding or that the context was, there's no context that rehabilitates it. I said what I said. Daniel watched her. I don't know, she continued, whether what I did this morning should end this meeting or not. That is genuinely your decision, and I have no standing to argue for a particular outcome. What I can tell you is that I understand what I did. I understand what it says about the judgment I brought to this lobby today. And I understand that those are the same faculties I would be bringing to the management of this building and the people in it. A pause. That's not a comfortable thing to sit with. The room was very quiet. Thomas Reyes was looking at his water glass. Gerald Fordham was looking at the window. Daniel Hayes was quiet for a long moment. He looked at the documents in front of him, then at the window, then, finally, back at Olivia Grant. I appreciate that, he said. It was not forgiveness. It was not absolution. It was not a dismissal of what had happened, or a signal that it would be forgotten. It was the acknowledgement of a person who has been heard by someone who had decided to listen carefully before deciding anything. The rest of the meeting took 2 hours and 14 minutes. Section 7.4 was resolved with modifications that satisfied both parties adequately, if not perfectly, which is generally the best outcome available in matters of this kind. The escrow arrangement was finalized. The timeline for operational handover, the transfer of day-to-day building management from Gerald Fordham's team to Grant Capital Partners' designated property management firm, was discussed in detail, and a phased schedule was agreed upon. 3 months of parallel operation, with Fordham's team remaining available for consultation through the first year. Gerald Fordham received this arrangement with the expression of a man who had not known whether he would be retained in any capacity, and was relieved to find that he would be. The notarization process proceeded through the 6 primary documents without complication. The title representatives confirmed the chain of title, presented the insurance commitments, and received the executed transfer instruments with the efficient, practiced satisfaction of people for whom paperwork completing itself correctly is the highest form of professional fulfillment. Daniel stepped out twice during the meeting. The first time, he excused himself briefly and went to the small lounge. He was gone for 4 minutes. When he returned, he was carrying a piece of paper small, folded once that he put in the pocket of his jacket, and his expression had the quality of a face that has just been shown something it considers excellent. He did not explain it. The second time, he took a call that lasted 6 minutes. He apologized for it concisely and went into the hallway. When he returned, the meeting picked up exactly where it had left off. At 11:14, the last signature was applied to the last document. There were handshakes around the table, the measured, professional handshakes of people who have accomplished something and are acknowledging the accomplishment with appropriate restraint. Gerald Fordham's handshake with Daniel was the longest. He held it a beat past professional necessity. "It's been an honor," he said. "Your father built something worth taking care of. I've tried to take care of it." "You have," Daniel said. "I know you have." The Grant Capital team gathered their materials. Ryan assembled the portfolio and laptop with the efficiency of a person who has been waiting to leave for a while. Olivia was last to her feet. She stood for a moment at the end of the table with the executed documents in her portfolio and the building's deed somewhere in the title company's files completing its transfer to her name, and she looked at Daniel Hayes across the table. "Mr. Hayes, she said. I'd like to send you a tenant relations framework we've been developing. It's specific to this building, the tenant mix, the building's history, the kinds of provisions that would protect the smaller operators on the lower floors. She paused. I'd like your input, not as a contractual obligation, just because I think I'd produce a better document with your knowledge of this building than without it. If you're willing. He looked at her for a moment. Then, send it to Patricia, I'll take a look. It was not warm. It was not cold. It was the answer of a person who has decided to leave a door open without walking through it yet, which is the most honest answer available when trust has not been built, but the possibility of its construction has not been closed. She nodded once. She picked up her portfolio. She walked out. In the elevator, standing with Ryan, who had the good judgment to say nothing, she looked at the panel as the doors closed and the car began its descent through the 40 floors of the building that was now, in the most technical and binding sense, hers. She was already thinking about the framework, already thinking about what it would need to include and what she would need to learn to make it mean something, already beginning the longer, quieter, more difficult work of becoming what the building actually required of its owner. It was not comfortable work. She suspected it would take considerably longer than 14 months. Part 11. The snow outside. Daniel found Lily in the small lounge at 11:32. She was sitting cross-legged on the low couch with the activity kit open across her lap and the marine animals book Thomas had left beside her, but she had not used either. On the drawing pad, in orange and black and blue and a shade of gray she had achieved by alternating light strokes of 2 different pencils, she had drawn a building. It was very tall. It was somewhat too wide. It was surrounded by what was clearly meant to be a blizzard, short, diagonal strokes radiating outward from a cloud she had drawn in the upper left corner with evident conviction. In front of the building stood 2 figures, one taller, wearing what was identifiably a hard hat rendered in careful outline. One smaller, whose head was unmistakably, lovingly, anatomically approximate a penguin. "Is that us?" he asked. She held the drawing up and examined it with the objective scrutiny of an artist assessing her own work. "That's you," she confirmed, pointing to the hard hat figure. "And that's me, the penguin head. And that's the building, the too-wide tower. But I made the building too wide. The floors all come out the sides on the left. It looks like the building to me. The real building is taller and thinner." She was already planning the correction. He could see it in the set of her jaw, the same set his own jaw had, according to photographs from when he was her age, which he had seen only once in his mother's albums and had not told Lily about because he didn't want to encourage the comparison. She collected her colored pencils with the methodical efficiency of a person who takes care of their tools. "Are you hungry?" "A little," she said, which meant yes. "Then let's go." She slid off the couch. She picked up the drawing carefully, without folding it. She went to the door and looked back at the lounge at the activity kit, the marine animals book, the colored pencils she had returned to their container with the brief, satisfied survey of someone making sure they haven't left anything behind. "Was your meeting good?" she asked, as they walked back through the corridor. He considered this. "Eventually," he said. "Did people get along?" "Eventually," he said again. She accepted this without pressing further, with the equanimity of a child who has spent her whole life being around adults in rooms, and has concluded that eventually is usually the best available answer, and is generally sufficient. In the lobby, the marble floor had been mopped since the morning rush, and was polished and gleaming again. Marcus, at the security desk, straightened slightly when they came through. He made eye contact with Daniel and gave a nod that communicated, with the economy of a gesture that contains more than it shows, something that neither of them would need to name. "Have a good afternoon," Daniel said. "You too, Mr. Hayes. You too, Miss Hayes." Lily looked up at him with the pleased gravity of a child who has been addressed correctly. "Goodbye," she said seriously. Outside, the storm had changed its character. The driving sheets of the morning had given way to something gentler, light flakes that drifted rather than drove, descending in loose, unhurried spirals that accumulated without urgency. The city had returned from its white erasure. The towers were visible again, their upper floors still hazed, but their bases and street-level details distinct. The river was visible from the bridge on Adams. The sidewalks had been cleared in long, dark paths through the white. They walked. Lily walked with her free hand holding the drawing carefully away from her body, flat, so the wind wouldn't crease it. She was looking at the buildings as they passed, tilting her head back to trace their heights, comparing, calibrating, filing the information away in whatever internal system she used for things that mattered. "Daddy," she said, after half a block. "Yeah, that woman from the lobby. What about her?" Lily thought for a moment. She was not the kind of person who said things before she had them arranged. She wasn't very nice. But then, at the end, through the glass, it looked like you were listening to her saying something. And you weren't mad anymore. He considered how much of this she had seen through the conference room glass, and concluded that she had seen enough. "Were you still mad?" she asked. "No," he said. "Not at the end." "How come?" They reached a crosswalk. The signal was red. The snow drifted down around them in its gentle spirals. Lily looked up at him with the patient, earnest attention she brought to questions she actually wanted answered. He took his time with it. "Being angry is real," he said. "It's a real thing, and there are real reasons for it, and it's allowed. I was angry this morning, but being angry at someone and staying angry at them are different things. Staying angry at her all afternoon, after she'd said what she actually meant that would have been more about me than about her." Lily considered this. The signal changed. They crossed. "She said sorry, though," Lily said. "She did. In her own way. Do you believe her?" He thought about Olivia Grant's face when she had said what she said. The particular quality of it, the absence of performance, the plainness of it. The fact that she had named the error precisely and hadn't reached for softer language that would have made it easier for herself. "Yes," he said. "I think she meant it. So now she has to be different," Lily said. She said it the way she said arithmetic, like a conclusion that follows necessarily from the premises. Something like that. "That sounds hard. Most things that matter are." She thought about this for another half block. Then, "Daddy?" "Yeah? Why didn't you yell at her?" "When she said the thing about when she said the stuff about me." He was quiet for a moment. The parking garage was ahead, its entrance a dark rectangle in the white facade of the building's base. "Because yelling at her would have been about making myself feel like I'd done something," he said. "And I didn't need to do something. I needed her to understand something. Those are different." Lily absorbed this. They reached the garage entrance and turned in out of the snow. "The drawing?" she said, looking at it in her hand as they crossed the concrete floor toward the truck. "I'm going to fix the building when we get home. Make it the right shape. You don't have to fix it. It's good. I want it to be right." She said it without drama, without urgency, just as a simple statement of what she intended. She folded it carefully once and put it in her coat pocket alongside the animal facts book. He unlocked the truck, a 10-year-old black F-150 with a cracked dashboard and a rear seat that folded flat for equipment and a heat system that worked perfectly and mattered considerably more than the dashboard, and helped Lily up into the booster seat and buckled her in, went around to the driver's side. He sat for a moment before starting the engine. Through the garage entrance, he could see the snow still coming down, the street outside, white and quiet. Somewhere in the building, 2 blocks over, Olivia Grant was probably on the phone, or already in a car heading back to the 43rd floor of her own building, beginning the process of holding what she had acquired, beginning the work of being worthy of it. He didn't know if she would manage it. He genuinely didn't know. Some people did, when they were confronted not with anger but with clarity, when the mirror was held steadily enough and long enough that looking away stopped being an option, and all that was left was the question of what to do about what you'd seen. He thought she might. He was willing to wait and find out. He started the truck. "Where do you want to eat?" he asked. "Somewhere with pancakes," Lily said, with the definitiveness of someone for whom this question has a clear and non-negotiable answer. "I know a place." She settled back into the booster seat and retrieved her animal facts book and opened it again, because there were more facts in it than she had read yet, and the morning had been long and a little complicated, and facts were reliable in a way that mornings sometimes weren't. The truck pulled out into the white street. The snow came down around them, patient and indifferent and beautiful, covering everything equally: the marble towers and the small repair shops, the executive conference rooms and the tailoring storefronts, the people who owned things and the people who built them and the people who mopped the floors and the people who signed the documents. All of them moving through the same white city on the same winter morning, each of them carrying whatever they carried, going wherever they were going. Lily found a fact about humpback whales and read it twice to make sure she had it right. The city moved through the snow around them. They went to get pancakes. Epilogue. 6 weeks later. The tenant relations framework arrived in Patricia Whitmore's inbox on a Thursday morning, 6 weeks after the closing. It came as a PDF attachment to a brief email from Olivia Grant's assistant, and the email's subject line was Harrow. Patricia sent it to Daniel with a single line of accompanying text. Thorough. Genuinely thorough. It was 47 pages long. It covered communication protocols for rent reviews and policy changes, including a minimum 60-day advance notice requirement for any increase above the rate of inflation, which was more generous than anything in the existing lease terms. It covered a maintenance response framework with tiered timelines: critical repairs within 4 hours, urgent non-critical within 24, standard within 72, all benchmarks, the document noted, drawn from actual data on what tenants had reported mattered most in the 9-year record of Gerald Fordham's management reports, which Olivia's team had obtained and apparently read in full. There was a small business protection provision on page 28 that allowed commercial tenants below a defined revenue threshold to apply for documented hardship deferment, rent delay, not forgiveness, structured as a no-interest arrangement with a repayment schedule negotiated case by case. There was a section on building access and security culture that specified, in language that was unusually direct for a legal framework, all persons who enter, work in, or move through this building are entitled to equal treatment in their interactions with building management and ownership. This provision shall not be treated as aspirational. It is operational, and on page 31, in a section titled Stewardship Principles, there was a paragraph that Daniel read 3 times, then set his phone down and looked out his office window for a while. It read, in part, "The acquisition of a building is not the acquisition of a relationship. Relationships must be built. The tenants, staff, and daily users of this building have histories here. Histories that predate this ownership, and that this ownership has an obligation to understand before presuming to manage. This framework is an attempt to begin that understanding. It is not complete. It will require revision. We intend to revise it, and to do so in consultation with the people it concerns. Because a policy about people that is written without those people is a policy that does not yet know what it is about." He sent Patricia a reply. "The framework is good. Tell her we'll sign off on it." Patricia's reply: "She'll be pleased." A week after that, Olivia Grant emailed Daniel directly, not through counsel, not through assistants, with a question about one of the ground floor tenants, a shoe repair operation that had been in the building for 19 years and whose lease was coming up for renewal in October. She had a question about the history of the space, whether there had been previous renewal discussions, what the tenant's arrangement had been with his father. She said she wanted to handle the renewal correctly. He replied with what he knew, which was more than she had expected. He had visited the shop twice. He knew the owner's name. He knew the owner had been in that space since before Daniel had taken ownership, had been there when his father had first bought the building, and had told Daniel once that his father had come in for a resole every 6 months for years and had always stopped to talk for 20 minutes. He included this in the reply without editorializing. She wrote back, "This is exactly what I needed." There was a pause of several days. Then, "I wanted to say again, not through an attorney, not in a meeting, that what I did in the lobby that morning was wrong in a way I've been sitting with. I hope you and your daughter are well." He read that one sitting in his truck in the parking garage of a job site in Pilsen, waiting for a sub to arrive. He read it twice. He thought about Lily, who had fixed the drawing when they got home that evening, had redrawn the building narrower and taller, correctly proportioned, with the same blizzard around it and the same two figures in front, the hard hat and the penguin head, and had put it in the frame she used for her best drawings and set it on the windowsill in her room, where the morning light hit it. He wrote back, "We're well, thank you." It was not a long reply. It didn't need to be. Some things are complete in small amounts, the way certain structures are sound, not because of their mass, but because of the quality of what holds them together. Outside the garage, it had started to snow again. He watched it come down for a moment through the open bay door, soft and unhurried, covering everything equally. Then the sub arrived and he got out of the truck and went to work.